And when you start to do growth, there's a really good chance that you're going to fail a lot. Because one thing I tell people is that, growth is planning to fail, whereas product is planning to succeed.
Hi, and welcome to the June podcast. I'm your host, Enzo, co-founder at June. In this show, I'm talking to the most inspiring product and growth leaders out there who will share their tips on how to launch and grow your SaaS. No fuss, no BS. I hope you enjoyed the show.
Hey Darius, and welcome to the podcast. How are things?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having me, Enzo.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. So today we're going to talk about product engineering growth. I'm sure also personal challenges. A little bit about yourself. You've been in the Valley for quite some time. You started your career as a product engineer on a product that was called Ringo, where you became the head of product and engineering in 2 years. Ringo was an app with a simple photo feed and email update that predated Facebook newsfeed. And funny enough, you went to work with Facebook after that a few years later. You moved to Bebo, I'm not sure how to pronounce, as the VP of product growth and engineering. And as the first product engineering hire, you built their monetization, retention, and what you call also the viral elements, which also we're going to touch in a bit. To give back, you spent a year creating the Forward or FWD.us engineering team for a friend who started this nonprofit. And then big names. Head of growth engineering at Dropbox for 4 years. Your first duties consist in growing the user base and then monetization. Then Facebook to drive the product growth on the Messenger. Then VP of growth at Airtable. And this is where you and we kind of met for the first time. Not at Airtable, but when you were there. Then vendor as the CPO and the chief engineering officer. And now the chief growth officer at Otter.ai or at Otter. You're also an angel investor in companies like Calm, Airtable, Clubhouse, Census. And I'm sure you do a lot more than that. So that's a lot. How do you reflect on this journey so far?
It's been busy. I really enjoyed it. I really made a transition from originally a programmer out of school to someone who very quickly got into like product and growth and was really lucky to be at one of the places they were evolving growth and trying out new techniques and A/B testing a lot early on. And then I kind of fell in love with that, and growth's been the aligning thread throughout my career where every role I take has some growth element and often some product engineering element as well. And I've really enjoyed it. Like, Silicon Valley is a great place to work with amazing people, build new products and, always have some fresh, exciting challenge and part of the industry to figure out and optimize.
That's what really struck me when I looked into your resume again, and it was quite long. It's really the unique approach you seem to have to growth and, through kind of the engineering lens. So as I said, you started as an engineer. Could you maybe explain a little bit what this brought you, in terms of like your growth responsibilities these days, what coming from an engineering background kind of taught you?
From my perspective, one of the nice things about being an engineer and then moving into product leadership is you definitely understand how, an important part of the puzzle fits in. There are people who come in with, no engineering background, and then they rely on other people to understand like estimates or complexity. And I think a lot of the magic happens when you understand to some degree what the computer can do for you, and then match that up with the psychology of what do users really want. And if you can find the simplest way to deliver a high user value, you can often deliver that pretty quickly and pretty cleanly. And you're really making those like clean matches between capability and need are one of the ways that I think magic happens quickly on like with startups. And so I think having that engineering background allows me to do that matching a little bit in a different way than other people. There's also like, I think every different discipline brings its own perspective on it. Like I know a lot of great product leaders who come from design, product leaders who come from business, and obviously they have like different kind of superpowers as far as like ability to make things happen in their role. But like that, being able to kind of really get into the details of the product and the engineering of how it works is one thing that I think I bring. There's also just a focus on data and numbers that serve me well on the virality side of being able to like look very closely at numbers and also run my own database queries, which is maybe less unique now, but certainly when I started my career, it was only engineers running numbers. And then that allows me to get deep into viral flows and really optimize things in a way that often you can't if you're just looking at it from a design perspective.
Yeah. So you touch on the last pillar. So you touch on engineering, product, and the last pillar that you connected is growth. I really want to understand how you think about balancing the three. And also I would love to understand what is growth engineering. What does it mean?
So really growth engineering is any of the engineering that you need to do to support growth, like increasing the numbers of the website. And so that can often be A/B testing, but it can also be building out features like notification centers and other more kind of theoretically core product areas that support like the overall growth of the website. And sometimes growth gets roped in to do things that are not necessarily like growth explicitly, but are primarily to move numbers. Things like internationalization or building the Android app, which is, seen as kind of expansion efforts rather than, raw new product development. And so that's some of the stuff that growth engineering will often work on. And then what was your first question again?
My first question is, how do you balance growth engineering and product? Which one is driving which one?
Yeah, I mean, to start with, you really need a product that has product market fit, or at least very close to it. Something where, people use your product, they really love it, and they want to come back and use it more the next day, obviously, like ideally. And, some of the best signals are retention and also people paying for your product on an ongoing basis and retaining, as paid users. So if you have that, then it often makes sense to start working on growth. It makes sense to try to get more people into that relationship and share your product value with a wider audience. And so that's often when I encourage people to fire up a growth team and start really looking at their numbers and their funnels and trying to maximize their distribution to new customers.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think that's really the rule of thumb that everyone refers to. Don't do growth before PMF, correct?
Yeah.
What about this title, growth engineering? It's not something very common, or it's not something that you see in every company, or something that every company has. Is this part of what drive the success of these companies? Is it part of the culture? It means that they need to be engineering driven. Like, what's about this term? Because I haven't seen it everywhere, right? It's popular for sure, but not everywhere.
Well, I mean, just like there's product engineering and there's just engineering that supports any effort in the company. So growth is usually like more of a product team than anything. Like they're building product alongside the product team. They're like updating the onboarding flows, monetization flows. So as they update that, they need an engineering team, just like the product team does. So in one respect, they're like, an engineering team like any other. There are specifics to growth engineering that they often do more of. They're often responsible for making sure that flows are completely tracked. There's often more A/B testing in growth engineering, which requires a slightly different way of building. There's a lot of A/B testing in core product these days too. But definitely growth engineers will do a little more of that. And there are parts of the website they work on more. For instance, oftentimes the growth team will own monetization and payment. And so they'll have to work on that area of the code base. There is some complexity with running lots of experiments at the same time. A lot of that is around the data aspect, but some is around the code itself, because every experiment is a little bit like a hinge built into the website. And you can imagine sometimes you have code that ends up looking like an entire wall of doors. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a product, but like every part of the product can like bend and twist and like be in 2 or 3 different versions. And so, once you get like, even just 3 experiments on a page, you have 8 different versions of that page that could theoretically be shown to users that you then have to, manually test and effectively A/B test when you run your product. And so there are some complexities of growth engineering that maybe aren't as shared across all of, classic product engineering. It also can be a little bit different as far as like who you hire into it. Like, as I built growth engineering teams, I would often look for engineers who really wanted to have a business impact. They wanted to know that the work they did drove business numbers and resulted in either like money or users or something that really propelled the business forward. And this would be maybe in contrast to what I'll call like craft or like deep technical engineers. These are engineers who want to build the most technically complex, robust thing. That's the biggest technical challenge. But those 2 things sometimes are aligned towards each other. But very often you can build something very complex that doesn't drive business value, or the reverse. You could drive a lot of business value without doing something complex. And so, growth engineers are often that latter camp.
Do you find yourself having to shape this culture and these values? Is it something you come to shape and build, or is it something you assess kind of upfront when you usually join a company? What's needed there?
Yeah, it's both. So the first thing I try to do is understand whether like I'm a match for the company, like my iterative way of developing, oftentimes I want to build to learn, not build for like final forever launch. And then if the learning experience is that people really love it and they like this part and they don't like that part, then we'll kind of rebuild and finalize something for the actual final launch. And so, I have that more iterative style of building, and oftentimes I work better at companies that have that. I have actually changed growth cultures a bit at companies I've worked at, where when I was at Dropbox, I realized that sometimes it was challenging for growth engineers to get promoted because they're promoted often on the technical complexity of what they did. And sometimes growth engineers didn't have that. And so I actually built a different promotional framework, different leveling framework specific to growth engineers that talked about some of the complexity they did handle that was maybe not on the, purely technical depth side, but on the complexity of like handling many experiments between different engineers, handling data. There were a number of aspects of what growth engineers did do that was complex, both from a technical and also just organizational and business standpoint, that wasn't captured in the default engineering leveling framework. And so I built this other leveling framework to help get promotions and get really celebrate the growth engineers who are moving the business forward.
That's exciting. Can we find this ladder anywhere online? Would you be able to share some of these things afterward?
Dropbox has published their general ladder, but we don't have that one.
I think two things resonates with me right now. First is coming from, it sounds like from your background of like being an individual contributor, you've kind of kept that mindset and attitude of, okay, let's remain flat. Let's have people that can influence the business outcome. Is it kind of what led you to this direction? Do you know what kind of brought you to that, to kind of do work on growth engineering so much in your career?
Well, I don't just work on growth engineering. My last few jobs have been growth and product leadership. So growth engineering is primarily what I did at Dropbox. But yeah, I've always throughout my career really wanted to move the business numbers forward. And so as an IC for a few years at the beginning of my career and as a leader since then, I have been really focused on trying to just think about what the core needs of the business are from a numeric standpoint. Like, do we need more users, more revenue, even just more people in the team, and really try to do everything I can to really grow the business and really get that next level of numbers and like the 2x or even the 10x goals achieved.
Connecting the dots between your team, like one of the challenge of your day to day, is it? It sounds like almost you operating with this kind of goal revenue within the organization and trying really to push, product and engineering and growth people, like growth engineering people to reach revenue targets. Have you learned any great leadership practices across these years to, kind of connect people to the business and make sure people were empowered? Could you share one of that with us?
Yeah, one thing I try to do to connect people to the business, like our local execution on a team to like the overall business goals and strategy, is to have a crisp metric that each team is striving for. And so, for instance, I might have an activation team, and our goal is to have activated like new teams on the platform, like a bunch of people from the same domain who are all using our app together. And for that kind of goal, I'll then break it down to say, okay, for every given quarter, we want to do the projects that help move that goal as much as possible with the least amount of effort, like effectively an ROI calculation. And so I'll encourage the teams to put together opportunity sizing for each project to say, okay, believably, if we did this project, what would change in the product? And then how would people's behavior change such that it would meet this goal? And so if, there's one page, we're going to add a button, 10% of people are going to click on that button, half of those people are going to succeed in our metric, then maybe we just moved our metric by 5%, something like that. And then divide that by the amount of engineering effort, and you get an overall kind of expected ROI of any given feature. And then you can stack rank those and do the ones that look the most valuable. This is not just valuable from a perspective of like doing great projects and like having some estimation of their impact, but it's really powerful in that it helps the entire team internalize the trade-off of achieving a given metrics win with how much effort goes into it. And what I found is when I do that on teams, they themselves come up with projects that have higher expected ROIs. They come up with ideas that impact the metric more and also do it with like less effort, such that their project kind of rides up that stack rank to the top. And so it really helps the team crystallize their own ideas and gut feels about what might be good on the site into high impact, doable projects that then we can accomplish and then have that impact.
Would you be able to share with us what one of these top metric was, and maybe some of the project that you can disclose that had big impact, whether it's at Otter or Airtable or vendor. I would love to hear some of these examples.
Yeah, so at Airtable, one of the things we're looking to do is increase the number of activated users, like the people who successfully used Airtable, stuck around, built a base, invited their coworkers, all that kind of stuff. And so I think our main metric at that time was, just getting people back in the fourth week and having fourth week multi-user active, meaning like 2 people using a workspace in the fourth week. So that meant that they not only tried it, they not only played around at the site, but they actually invited someone, and then both of them were using it even weeks after they signed up. So that would be a pretty good indication that they're ramped and going with the product. And so, we were looking around for something that could possibly move those numbers. And looking at the current numbers, we saw that a number of the people who uploaded documents did a lot better on Airtable. Like if you uploaded your own spreadsheet and looked at it in the Airtable format, there's a good chance that you kind of fell in love with Airtable and kept using it. So we thought, why don't we try that out in the onboarding flow? So we changed the onboarding flow to encourage people to upload documents and really make it front and center rather than kind of a sideline option. And we did find a lot more people would upload documents. And then we did find all of those people would actually stick around and convert at higher rates to activated users, as well as, I think, monetized users as well, though my memory is a bit hazy there. So that was one example of doing that backlog and estimation.
That's a great example. I need to ask you a very honest question at this point. Whenever I hear these great stories of uplift of activation or other metrics based on finding out natural behavior and then promoting it, I always wonder, how do you know that these people that engage with this new step of like uploading a document in the onboarding were not the people like motivated that would have done it afterward? Like, how do you differentiate from, basically highlighting something that people were already going to do, or promoting something for people that are already motivated or kind of like qualified, versus the other people that would not have done it? And this is where you basically created the uplift.
Yeah. So if you've got a great data scientist on the team, one thing you can do is you can run effective synthetic controls under those groups. So like, to say it in a simple way, you can look at the people who do the upload and see if before they do the upload, they really look equivalent to other people on the site. So for instance, if everyone who does an upload is from a large company and you find that large companies convert better on your platform, and then you see that the uploaders convert better on your platform, then you can see that really like it's the fact that they're large companies. It's kind of like that previous data point that is leading them to convert higher on the platform and not just the upload. However, if like the people who upload look the same demographically and by all signals as everyone else on your platform, but the people who happen to upload succeed more, then there's maybe more indication that the upload itself is a differentiating factor that is helping them succeed. Even then, it's very hard to know if there's some like confounding variable that you simply don't have in your data or haven't located yet. And so, in some ways, the only way to really get an understanding of whether it can help is to A/B test it. And if you A/B test it and the numbers go up, to some degree, that means it helps. And so that's kind of my end test, but you can run some numbers and at least attempt to find like a confounding correlate that's prior to those that leads to actually the downstream behavior. And that would mean that like that particular one is like less likely. There's actually a company I invested in that does this professionally. It's called getloops.ai. Mm-hmm. And they automatically find these kind of causal chains in your data and can tell you like which thing actually made the difference. And they can tell you if it's upstream or downstream. And so you don't over index on any one metric. But there's some pretty complex data there. Really, the only way to know for sure is to A/B test it and see if it's a win for your particular product.
Right. Yeah, great company. Loops chat with one of the team members there recently, and that's awesome. I think we're doing something similar, but they're doing that for the data science aspect or the most advanced analysis, and they're really killing it. And as you said, yeah, it requires some human resources, some people on the data team. So it's probably not something you can do, every week. But I guess you do it on important bets or really situations where you want to figure things out, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And again, it does take a lot of data science resource. So either you have a few people to run those numbers for you, or you get like a third-party product. But it's pretty cutting edge today, I think.
How do you decide if you want to do an A/B test or if you want to push something because it's going to be a step function? Because you can't go through the A/B test doors every single time, right? Your job is not to do that. So what's the framework that you use there?
Yeah, so this is something I was just talking about with our head of data at Otter.ai, Jeff Emlin, and he's our head of data, and so he gets very competent at doing all these things. But even he says, you shouldn't run an A/B test every time. For instance, one of the things he says is that if you have a product that you want to launch anyways, like you think it's just a better feature experience, or at some level you're required to launch it, then you should probably just launch it. And if you want to, you can just look at the numbers before and after. That'll give you some indication of how this feature launch has changed your numbers, even though it's not a perfect indication, because obviously it's temporal and there's maybe other things that happened, after that launch date. But it'll give you some indication, and it also just saves you a bunch of time. This is especially important for small B2B sites that often don't have that much traffic. Like if you have like 100 users sign up a day, you're just not going to have the volume in order to run like a meaningful A/B test to stat sig, anytime soon. And so for most part, you should just have good ideas and like launch them. And then maybe just look at the numbers. And if the numbers tank, then, maybe reconsider it. But the truth of the matter is that you can actually go stat sig on A/B tests at low volume. However, they just need to be very dramatic A/B tests. Like obviously, if you do something that results in a 50% increase, you don't need that much data to see that 50% increase in A versus B. But if you're doing something that's more of a 5 or 10% increase, it could take tremendous amounts of data, weeks or months for some companies. And so in those cases, you really have to think to yourself, like, do I need to A/B test this? Because to some degree, if it makes a small difference, maybe it's not worth A/B testing if you really think it's a better experience. And if it makes a large difference, you're going to see the numbers drop or go up anyways. And so, there is an argument that, especially at small volumes, you should just go for it. I do encourage people to use an A/B test calculator and see how long something's going to run. And that'll give you some idea of like, what's the kind of lift and the time span. It's also a question of whether you have multiple things running on a given surface area. Like if you're doing lots of experiments on your homepage and they all need to be run separately, then some things you just want to launch if you think they're better experiences, just to make progress in your business. However, if you have more traffic and it's more sensitive, like there's like a payment flow and you're really not sure if it's going to help, it could make 10% up, 10% down. I personally think that's a good thing to A/B test, because you don't want to get to the, end of 2 months and have your revenue go down and not know why did it go down. Maybe it was that A/B test. We're not sure. It's a lot nicer to know that, okay, we A/B tested it and it does look like, this experiment was positive or negative. And so whatever happened to the revenue was some other reason. So I do think there's some valid reason to actually just get the numbers and understanding, at least in these high importance cases that are likely to have downstream questions like monetization. But it's definitely a trade-off. I recommend that people moving from big companies to small companies should probably A/B test less than they think. Because at a big company, you can A/B test everything quickly. You also have the right, infrastructure, enough engineering talent, et cetera. But at a small company, you just don't have as many resources or as much time or as much traffic. And there's a pretty good chance that you just want to put your best idea live and move on.
Yeah, that's something I've seen a lot, advising company on their data stack. They seem to try to replicate a lot of the things they've seen upstream, upmarket. Is there a counterexample? So you mentioned, you have this target metric and then you're listing all these initiatives and you rank them against, this target goal. Was there some surprise stuff you really didn't believe in that ended up moving the needle? Whether they were just like small acts that ended up working or, huge project that had a big impact?
And most of the stuff we launched were like we're pretty hopeful about it because we will want to launch our best experiments. So I'm trying to think of a time that I launched something I didn't believe in or was surprised about. We are doing a test right now at Otter where we're improving the checkout page, just make it a lot more clean and, clear and industry standard. And it's actually helping out a lot more with logged out users than logged in users. Mm-hmm. And that surprised me. I didn't expect that. But in some ways, it kind of makes sense that like a cleaner, easier to use page might help people who are still signing up for the service and figuring it out even more than people who are committed to the service and using us for like months or weeks or perhaps years. And so, that did surprise me. I thought it would kind of like, lift all boats and help all users evenly potentially. But it seems like it really helps like a certain set of users more than others.
Yeah. Grouping the users or like segmenting the user is definitely like really part of your job, I believe. So something that really stood out also when I looked at your resume was when you talk about Dropbox, you said that you first worked on pumping up the user base, and then you worked more on monetization. Sorry, the monetization. I was curious to hear, do you feel right now with your job at Otter or before with your job at Dropbox, do you feel growth and monetization are mutually exclusive when it comes to your work? Are they coming together? And I'd love if you could put that into the perspective of the crisis. It seems like now people are trying not to grow at all costs, but kind of be mindful of their cost structure. How do you think about this topic?
I mean, the way that I do growth is often using site optimization. And so in many ways, like growth and monetization are not opposing in those worlds. Like you can optimize the site for growth, user growth, or you can optimize the site for monetary growth. And both of them are, quite possible to do at the same time and don't conflict really, except, which you spend your time on. You only can do like so much every month. It is true that in the wider sphere, a lot of growth is more paid. And so if you have paid marketing, or if you're like, building a relationship, or, hiring people explicitly to do, monetization growth efforts, then yeah, like you have to kind of spend money to make money. And in a low cash flow environment, people want to spend less money and it's harder to make money. And so everything just kind of like shuts down with kind of a circular self-reinforcing effect. Myself, I've always just optimized websites to do everything better themselves. And so I usually have a product eng team that I, build in perpetuity that then is optimizing these services constantly so that whoever comes by, they, go as viral and grow as large and monetize as well as they possibly can. And so I feel like that's a bit recession proof. Like you can always be doing that. And even if your traffic goes down, your monetization goes down a little bit, you build up these systems such that when the market comes back, it kind of rises with the market. That being said, if you can't hire as many people, you can't do as much work and all that slows down too. So there definitely is a flywheel there for almost all companies that kind of spins up and spins down with the macro.
That's awesome to hear, actually, because I remember working for a fintech company in Berlin, and the product was free, and one day it became paid, and it was a massive shift for the company, and we really struggled to adopt this new mindset because we were growing kind of at all costs back then. And I remember just the company had to rotate a lot of the people just because they were not fitting anymore, So it's pretty great to hear that you don't have this conflict and you can deal with both at the same time. Was it always the case?
That's fair. For some businesses, it's very different. You're right. Like the entire business has to change because of the market and because of the shift in monetization.
Have you experienced one of this company?
I don't think so. I mean, I've been at companies where when the market slowed down, we like paused hiring and we, kind of went into a little bit like turtle mode and try to kind of survive and get through for a bit rather than focusing as much on growth. It is also true that, during downturns, I've been part of companies where we have looked at raising prices because we weren't able to get new customers. And so either getting, a slightly higher prices for our current software or, really focusing on retention, trying to keep the people who are currently using our software to stick around became more of a focus rather than trying to get net new customers. So there have been, some shifts in focus for the growth teams I've run, based on different climates or different places the company's at.
Got it. And so besides touching the price and having to maybe focus on retention, what is the most daunting task that someone can ask you? What's the thing that would be really, really hard to take, or what has been some of the very hard professional challenge you had or you may have? I
think one of the toughest professional challenges I had was coming into Airtable as employee 100 with no team at all. So that meant that I started out by like making the growth strategy and then actually coding up the first few growth experiments and then hiring the whole engineer and product and data team myself. Obviously with help from the rest of the company, but, really, owning the hires for all three of those areas for a little while. And it was really hard to have impact and build a team and build multiple functional teams, and ramp up in this role and understand the data like all at the same time. Like I realized too many mandates for myself. And so now when I join a company, I really try to at least have a small team that I can work with. So I get a little bit of leverage and we can split up the tasks a bit. And then also be a little more realistic, talking to leadership about, what I can do on what scale, because, for a growth team to really function well, you do need an engineering team associated. Ideally, you have a few PMs who can like locally own the projects. you really do need a more mature data stack than a lot of very early companies have. You need good tracking and clarity and tools like June, so you understand, what I'm using, like what's happening to users, what their experience is. And then with all that together, you can start to do growth. And when you start to do growth, there's a really good chance that you're going to fail a lot. Because one thing I tell people is that, growth is planning to fail, whereas product is planning to succeed. Like growth builds things that are trying to be even better than the original best idea that the company had, or at least the original kind of current status of something, which is often someone's best first take at something. And growth is trying to take that and make it even better. So if you're trying to make it even better, there's a good chance that you might make a mistake and you might make it worse, actually. And so there's this mentality of trying out lots of things and assuming that you're going to be wrong by default and occasionally right. And thus you need to move fast and look at your numbers. In order to do that, you need good numbers. You need a good engineering team. You need a good growth platform. And then you need to do it a little bit and probably learn and fail for 3 to 6 months. And after you do all that, you'll have a pretty good understanding of what's going on. You'll have a pretty good cadence built up, and then you can start really moving the numbers. And so I feel like growth teams really start moving things month 6 to 18. And sometimes month 12 to 24. And so, it really takes a bit of patience and building to get this kind of growth motion off the ground.
Yeah, it's great to hear that from you, because it feels like, looking at your track record, things were always easy and worked. But it's great to hear that even when you joined Airtable, it took some time to take things off the ground, right?
Yeah, I was very proud of the team I built, and I really loved everyone on the team. It was kind of fun to have a team that I built myself, and all of us were very growth minded. We had some really great experience in growth. But yeah, all of those steps, one of the tricks about, I think, a growth team, and maybe any team, is really structuring your work so that you get some validation and some wins early. And, you build out kind of a good enough team to start, and then a bigger and bigger team. I feel like maybe this is true of all functions, but there's kind of a phased approach where you do the obvious stuff, and then you get better data and you do next level stuff. And then you have enough kind of trust from the organization and enough data and experience that you can do some moonshot big bets. And you have to kind of do it in that order, because if you do a different order, it ends up that too likely that, you'll take too big risks up front, or that people won't understand what you're doing, or you won't be able to learn at the rate you need to learn because your bets are too long and too slow. And so there really is kind of a small, medium, large, I think, growth team that really makes sense on a number of different aspects.
I agree so much with you. Sequencing is really the underrated term in startup world. It is so important. At the end of the day, you can do everything, and you can go in any direction, but what matters is what you're going to do next. And after that, what you're going to do after that. So really, really with you. One thing that is interesting about your experience at Airtable, and I think other products like Dropbox, is a lot of them have some kind of freemium motion, right? They have a free plan. And now probably we would refer to that as PLG. I'd love to pick your brain 2 minutes on this one. Is there one thing that you believe in PLG that most people misunderstand or don't get at the moment?
One that I talk about a little bit with my psych framework is the time to understand your product. It's partly activation time, but really part of it is how long is it until a user's oh yeah, that makes sense. I want it. I need it. And ideally with a PLG product, that happens very quickly. And ideally that happens before they even use the product, before they even personally are using the product. So for instance, Dropbox, when you get a file from someone else, you receive the file, you click on the link, you see the file, you download it, it works. And you're this is great. I just downloaded a large video file. Usually that was hard. What just happened? And you realize that there's a site, Dropbox, and it does this thing and it tells you about it and you can use it too. And you're this is great. And so before you even proactively go to the site or try to use it or try to sign up even, you have this simple experience of value and you understand the value prop. I'm also an investor in the Calm meditation app. And even before you go to the Calm meditation app, you probably have a decent understanding of the value of meditation. The same is also true with Zoom, right? When someone says, hey, let's meet, here's a link. And you're what's this? Pretty much by the time you've met with your friend, you understand the value prop of Zoom before even proactively going to the Zoom website and signing up. And so, sometimes I think about that level of understanding the product before you even proactively go to the website about the product, like that's like the smallest possible time to understand and get excited about the product. This is in contrast to like a B2B sales app where you have a deep sales process. Like for instance, if you're going to work with a company that like provides you with like aluminum tubing or something, you probably spend hours learning about the company and seeing if it's what you want and seeing if like there's an entire learning process. Like Palantir is one of my favorite examples of like, no one shows up like, oh yeah, Palantir, I need that. They're like, yeah. What is this? I heard about it. Like talk to someone again, figure out the constraints. Like it's a very long learning process. And I think oftentimes people don't take into account the length of the learning process when they think about their user onboarding and even their PLG motion. And what I'll submit is that products with an incredibly hyper small learning process are often some of the best for PLG motions, because people can just instantly be like, yes, I want it, I need it, I'm going to do it myself. And when they're inspired instantly, then they can like do the work themselves of the PLG motion, because effectively they're being their own salesperson at some level. And so, and at some level, you don't need a salesperson because like the product sells itself. And so you need something like that where the learning curve is minuscule in order to really build a great one, in my opinion.
That's fascinating. I never thought about this one. I absolutely love it. I think I saw some time ago an advertising for Calm. And that was my, I think, aha moment. It was actually, I think the thing, it was a circle, opening up and decreasing. And it was like, like synced on my heart and like helping me, breathe and take a respiration. And I didn't even click even on the ad, right? I didn't even install the app or start using it, but I was already doing meditation through the advertising. And so I think that really resonates with what you said. Kind of, I already got it before I even signed up or even touched that ad. That was brilliant.
That's a great example. Yeah.
That's brilliant. We're almost at the end. One last question for you. So you're advising startups. You are a growth product engineer person. You know a lot about data. And we talked about PLG. What are some of the metrics you think B2B SaaS going for PLG should measure? What are some of the main, do you advise startups to look into these metrics? Do you think it's not important? And if you do, what do you tell them to look at?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many good blog posts. I'm not sure I'm going to do as well as them on the spot. But I mean, really, when I come into an app, the most important thing really is retention. Like, do people who show up and use the app, do they stick with it? Do they love it? And if so, then the next question I'd say is like monetization. Like, so if they stick with it and love it, do they also pay for it? Like, which is also in some ways a signal of retention, that like they find value with it, that enough to pay for it. And also paid retention. Like, do they not only pay, but continually pay and stick with the product over months and years? Then I think the next most interesting and powerful metric is like, top line growth of users. Like, are people coming into the product? Which, if the other things are true, then it'll probably connect with monetization. Although it might not. Like, the next question is activation. Like, if we have a great experience that some people retain on, what percent of your new users are activating that experience? And really, then if you get retention right and then activation right, then you get top of funnel right. Then you've got this like highly retentive product that's growing quite well. And maybe the last one arguably is monetization. Although all these kind of things, you don't just want to do that like 1, 2, 3, 4. You probably want to do a little bit of one and then a little bit of the other, kind of get all the plates spinning and all parts of the flow like somewhat healthy, and then go deep dive and optimize them even further. I do feel like, especially in the current business climate, it is really valuable to have an app that like does monetize as a reasonable level. I think we're a little bit through that era of just like massive user growth without some signal of monetization. And so I try to see that in apps before too long. The other thing I really look for is I sometimes try to find, I don't know, in some ways I call it like the elephant in the marble, but like, is there a subsection of your metrics or your user base that is using the product in such a way that you could imagine expanding that usage pattern to something that's a truly large business? So, Otter has got a lot of people using it just to transcribe uploaded, like Zoom calls or what have you. And so like, Otter started out as a transcription business. But one thing we realized is that we actually had the technology and the people and the mindset to really build this great AI meeting assistant. So now Otter will actually join your meetings and record and transcribe what happened, and automatically give you AI action items and summaries. And so that you can keep track of your meetings and actually figure out what's going on in them. And it's all effortless. So we took that same AI background of that early transcription business and then turned it into an AI meeting assistant business. And so that's an example of taking that, like looking at the data and looking at the capabilities and finding that kind of, almost like bigger business that's a subcategory of your current business that you could nurture and expand and build features around that could be even bigger than the first business, eventually. A little bit like streaming and Netflix, that kind of thing. It's like, what's that next business that's either a subcomponent or highly adjacent to our current business?
Yeah, that one is fascinating. I think I first heard the dad of the job to be done, whose name is Bob Musta, said that your main customers in the future are the outliers of today. And
yeah, that's a great way of saying it.
And it's very true. It's very, very true. That's a great way to wrap it up. Thanks, Darius, for coming. We're at the end of the episode. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is a great podcast. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I'll add the references you mentioned and your framework to the description. If people want to follow up with you, where should they, connect with you?
Yeah, I'm Darius MC, Darius MC. We can put in the show notes on Twitter and other places too. So feel free to find me there and ask me any questions you have about the podcast.
Awesome. I'll make sure to point to that. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the June podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe. This episode is powered by June. For a better way to do product analytics, visit june.so.